Hey guys, tonight we travel to the windswept grasslands of Central Asia. Not the glamorous part with silk robes and empire-wide trade routes, but the gritty bit with lice, dried mutton, and at least 3 different kinds of frostbite. You're a child on the Mongolian steppe. The fire's gone out. Your father's off somewhere making enemies. And your younger brothers are eyeing your fish like it's the last warm thing on earth. Which, frankly, it might be. You won't be handed power, riches, or even a steady diet. No, you'll have to take all that with a bow, a horse, and the kind of political finesse usually reserved for hedgehogs in a sack. Welcome to the early life of Temüjin, the boy who would become Genghis Khan. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from anywhere unusual, or just somewhere cozy, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you all are falling asleep from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born clutching a blood clot the size of a walnut. This isn't a medical emergency, it's a sign. According to Mongol lore, it means you're destined to be a great leader, or at least very determined in the face of adversity. Your name is Temüjin, and the year is probably 1162. Give or take the accuracy of oral tradition. Your father, Yasuji, is a tribal chief with the kind of leadership style that involves stealing brides and then forging shaky alliances over boiled mutton. One day, on his way back from arranging your marriage at age 9, because why not, he accepts some poisoned food from enemies and promptly dies. Mongol diplomacy, always a gamble. With your father gone, your family is abandoned by your clan. Suddenly, you're no longer the son of Khan, but a skinny kid digging for roots and fighting off wolves with a stick. You live in a felt tent with your mother Holon, a powerhouse of survival if there ever was one, and a band of equally hungry siblings. There's Joki, Kasar, Temüj, and Lil Kakian. And then there's Begtur, the half-brother who is technically older and keeps stealing the good food. One day, he tries to take your bow, and you and Kasar kill him. It's a little awkward, but you claim it was self-defense, Mongol style. Historians still argue whether this murder was the first step on your path to conquest or just a very intense case of sibling rivalry. Around this time, you start to understand the delicate art of survival. Fishing is essential. So is theft occasionally. You learn that if you want something like power, respect, or dried yogurt, you'd better be ready to take it or barter creatively for it. There are no schools. Your education comes from wind, hoofbeats, and watching how wolves hunt. You learn to ride before you can spell your name, which, to be fair, you can't spell anyway. You sleep under stars and dream of fire, but it's mostly because you're cold and hungry. And there's the social side of things. At 9, you're taken to live with the family of your future wife, Borte. This is basically a prolonged sleepover with political undertones. She's calm, thoughtful, and probably just as puzzled as you are, but she becomes your anchor. Years later, when everything else has burned or betrayed you, she'll still be there, spinning camel wool and giving side-eye to overconfident generals. Occasionally, you spot a distant rider, an eagle overhead, or a shaman muttering to a drum. These are the moments that shape you. Not in big dramatic ways, but in the small, quiet rules of Mongol childhood. Don't whistle at the sky. Don't turn your back on your horse. And don't trust a man with too much fermented mare's milk on his breath. You're not a hero yet, not a conqueror. You're just a scrappy, stubborn kid with a sharp gaze and a head full of plans. The landscape around you is vast, mostly empty, and incredibly windy. And it seems to whisper something just for you. Keep moving. One night, while wrapped in furs beside your family's battered yurt, your mother tells stories of old warriors, of steppes conquered and unconquered. You listen with half-closed eyes, pretending not to care, but you tuck every name away, every slight, every chance. The snow outside thickens. A fox pads past, leaving prints that vanish within moments. Somewhere out there are the men who poisoned your father, the tribes that left you for dead, the chiefs who mock your hunger and name. You sleep with your bow beside you, a small knot of ambition curled in your chest, and the stars keeping watch like ancient sentries. You're a teenager now, which in steppe terms means you're old enough to hold a grudge and ride through a blizzard without crying. You've already killed a brother, nearly starved, and watched your family survive through sheer Holon force. But surviving isn't the same as thriving. And what you want, what you've always wanted, is to be more than just a footnote in some other Khan story. The first step? Reclaiming a name. Specifically, your father's old allies, the Temüjin, who had ditched your family faster than a runaway goat the moment Yasujii died. You figure, maybe they'll recognize your rising charisma, your noble lineage, and your potential to unify the steppes. They don't. Instead, they tie you up with a wooden collar, a kaka, so large it makes it hard to scratch your ear without knocking someone out by accident. So here you are, a prisoner, clunking around like a bell-wearing ox, barely able to drink water without tipping over. Escape sounds hard, but then again, you've escaped starvation, frostbite, and Holon's disappointed stare. With a little luck, and the help of a sympathetic jailer who's either a soft-hearted teen or very tired of watching you bump into things, you manage to slip away at night. This isn't just an escape. It's your origin myth. Historians still argue whether you actually fled with help or Houdini'd your way out solo. But either way, it plants the first seed of your legend. Temüjin doesn't stay down. You return to your family, collar-free and full of new resolve. Around this time, you do what all power-hungry teenage boys do. Gather a small band of loyal friends. Mongols call this group the Nokur, sworn comrades who pledge themselves not by blood, but by personal loyalty. In modern terms, it's less bros before cons and more blood oaths before breakfast. One of the first to join you is Jamuka, childhood friend, blood brother, a fellow upstart with equally chaotic hair and dangerous dreams. Together, you build a bond over shared ambition, terrifying horses, and the belief that maybe, just maybe, you can change the world if you don't kill each other first. But unity's hard when everyone's hungry and half-feral. You're not a Khan yet. You're more like an ambitious startup with one good investor and a lot of debt. Still, you hustle. You make alliances with nearby clans, offer yourself as a loyal vassal, and slowly piece together a base of support. And then, you get your wife back. Yes, Borte. Remember her? She'd been kidnapped by the rival Merkits, which is not how honeymoons are supposed to work. You gather your ragtag forces, including Jamuka, and ride into battle. Against all odds, you win. Borte is rescued. You celebrate with fermented mare's milk and the realization that winning even one battle gets people whispering your name again. Now you have a wife, a son, Joki, though his paternity will be a juicy issue later, and a taste of something stronger than victory, momentum. But remember Jamuka? Yeah, about that. As your influence grows, so does his. And like all good frenemies, things start a fray. He's more into the traditional aristocratic clans, while you prefer promoting people based on merit. This sounds noble until you realize it mostly just annoys everyone with an old family tree and a golden tent. Eventually, you both claim the title of Khan, and suddenly it's not just personal. It's civil war. In 1187, the two of you go full Mongol drift racing across the plains. You fight. You lose. Jamuka captures some of your men and decides to make a point by boiling them alive. Yes, boiled. Like dumplings. Only not dumplings. You escape, again. Because of course you do. You retreat, regroup, and importantly, learn. You study the flaws in your command, the cracks in your alliances, and the limits of your charm. You start to see leadership not as charisma, but as choreography. It's about knowing when to bend, when to break, and when to offer mutton. You also do something bold. You promote based on loyalty and skill, not just birthright. This might not seem revolutionary, but on the steppes, it's basically rewriting the social contract. Suddenly, a blacksmith's son can lead 100 horsemen. A slave's grandson can guard your tent. The aristocrats grumble, but the people, especially the poor and clanless, flock to your banner. You're no longer the hungry boy scraping lichen off rocks. You're Temüjin, a rising warlord with a reputation for mercy and murder, depending on the day. A wife who keeps your household smarter than your army, and a mission. Unify the Mongol tribes, or die really, really trying. The land remains harsh. The weather, unpredictable. At least once, you nearly freeze to death beside your horse, the two of you curled like spoons in a blizzard. But every morning you rise, and your name carries just a little more weight. Not because of fancy hats or divine lineage, but because you refuse to be erased. And slowly, the steppe begins to whisper something different. Not just keep moving, but follow him. You wake up before dawn, as always. The cold is less biting now, though that might just be because you're getting used to it. You stretch out your limbs, your joints creaking like old leather, and look out across the steppe. The grass ripples like a green ocean under the breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a horse snorts. Your ever-present reminder that conquest, like travel, is only possible with a good mount and a half-decent saddle. It's 1,190-something. Dates are fuzzy out here, and no one's inventing calendars between goat stampedes. But what's clear is that you've bounced back stronger after Jamukha's betrayal and that whole unpleasant, boiling your men alive thing. You've been forging alliances with smaller tribes, the ones sick of the old aristocratic order and looking for someone, anyone, who doesn't treat them like disposable tent decorations. And then, like a campaign ad for brutal optimism, you start winning them over. Clan by clan, banner by banner. The turning point comes not with a bloodbath, but with a promise. That anyone who joins you will be protected, promoted on merit, and given the chance to shape a new steppe order. You're not selling dreams, you're selling stability. And honestly, that's rarer than gold out here. Even rarer than sheep who don't bite. Still, not everyone's impressed. Jamukha resurfaces, again, with a fresh coalition of old nobles. All furious that you're lifting commoners into positions of power. He's the Khan of tradition. You're the Khan of why not try something else? By 1201, you both end up claiming the sacred title of Gurkhan, meaning universal ruler, which is kind of awkward when there are clearly two of you. Historians still argue whether either of you actually had the right to claim it, but semantics aren't your concern. You're more focused on keeping your head attached to your body. Fighting resumes. You clash again in another brutal battle, this time at the River Onan. It's a vicious seesaw of skirmishes and stolen livestock. Jamukha wins the day again, but even he can tell. You're not the same Temüjin he tangled with last time. You retreat with dignity, your forces bruised but intact, and most importantly, still loyal. Here's where you do something most future conquerors would scoff at. You pause. You actually stop and think. You build relationships with traders, secure salt routes, and start integrating people who speak entirely different languages. Instead of ruling like a warlord, you begin acting like a statesman. You even reach out to the powerful Jin dynasty to the south, offering tribute and securing a peace deal. Not because you love diplomacy, but because your warriors need rest, your horses need fodder, and you're starting to realize that conquering China with 20 guys and a goat isn't feasible. Yet, back on the steppe, you call a grand kurultai, a kind of tribal congress, but with more meat and less shouting. And this time, the tribes actually show up. They listen, they vote, and they declare you something new, Khan of the Mongols. This isn't just a title. It's your declaration of independence. No longer are you the lost son of a poisoned chieftain or a guy with a cool backstory and a loyal horse. You're now the head of a united tribal confederation, a role no one's pulled off since, well, no one successfully. Your camp swells. Your blacksmiths forge standardized weapons. Your messengers begin building a rough relay system to carry orders across the steppes. In your new code, the beginnings of what will become the Yasa, your law, starts taking shape. It's somewhere around here that something weird starts happening. People stop asking if you'll take over the world. They start asking when. Also around this time, you rescue some Chinese artisans from bandits, and they return the favor by teaching your craftsmen how to build siege weapons. Now, if that doesn't scream foreshadowing, I don't know what does. You're riding high, and Jamukha knows it. In a move that surprises everyone, possibly even himself, he sends you a letter, a peace offering. Maybe he's tired. Maybe he senses the tide turning. Maybe boiling people wasn't the win he thought it'd be. You consider, and eventually you respond. You meet him, talk, and, for one strange, peaceful moment, the two of you reconcile. It's a steppe miracle. Of course, it doesn't last. The final break comes quickly. A few more raids, a few more double crosses, and eventually, in 1206, Jamuka's allies betray him and hand him over to you. Now here's the thing. You could kill him. Everyone expects you to. But instead, you offer him a chance. Live in exile, be your friend again, no hard feelings. Jamuka refuses. He asks for death. And so, with genuine sorrow, you grant it. No torture, no spectacle, just an execution so dignified it stuns the steppes. With that, the civil wars end. The tribes are yours, and a Kurultai is called again. This time not to declare you somewhat in charge, but to give you the big one, Genghis Khan. Not a Khan, the Khan, universal ruler, heaven's chosen horseman, the guy whose name will make continents sweat. You don't grin, you nod. You've been walking toward this for decades. You don't need fireworks. You just need your horse, your code, and your army. The world hasn't met you yet, but it will. So now, you're Genghis Khan. The title sounds dramatic, and honestly, it is. You've just been proclaimed ruler of all Mongols at the Great Kurultai of 1206. And while there aren't any Instagram posts or engraved plaques to commemorate the moment, the weight of it settles onto your shoulders like a horse blanket soaked in snow. You sit there, probably pretending to look solemn and contemplative, while inside you might be thinking, wow, that took a while. But the ceremony is more than pomp. This is the formal start of something nobody, not your enemies, not your allies, maybe not even you, has ever quite seen before. A unified Mongol nation, ruled not by bloodline alone, but by a system. Your system. A mobile empire built on merit, fear, and just enough charisma to make even your prisoners consider changing teams. You know better than to let victory go to your head. Conquest might be your calling, but management is now your job. You got tribes to wrangle, taxes to invent, spies to train, and a law code to write. Yes, a law code. Because nothing screams future world conqueror like obsessing over logistics. You introduce the Yasa, your all-purpose, mostly oral set of rules that covers everything from military discipline to how to treat envoys, to, yes, making sure you don't pee in rivers people drink from. Civilized stuff? Historians still argue whether the Yasa ever existed in written form or was just recited like bedtime poetry by frightened generals, but either way, people follow it. And let's talk about those people. You got herders, hunters, bandits, and blacksmiths. You've got loyalists from 20 clans and exiles from 10 more. Some of your new officers were born slaves. A few can't even ride that well. But you promote them anyway because they're loyal, smart, and they don't whine. You issue decrees banning the kidnapping of women, protecting foreign merchants, and demanding that every man be prepared to fight, even if he was just in the middle of making yogurt. You're blending the chaos of steppe life with the skeletal structure of civilization, and weirdly, it works. Meanwhile, you establish a decimal army system. Every unit of 10 men reports to a unit of 100, and so on, all the way up to 10,000. No more relying on tribal allegiance alone. Your army is now a machine with interchangeable parts and very few feelings. To keep things from descending into chaos, you also start a postal system. Because nothing says military efficiency like express mail. Riders called yam zip across the steppe like caffeinated falcons, switching horses at relay stations every few miles. They carry messages, intelligence, and occasionally urgent orders like, don't sack this city. Yet, you're no longer just leading raids for revenge or territory. You're constructing an actual state, portable, fearsome, and just ordered enough to keep the whole operation from imploding. Of course, now that you've united the Mongols, the question becomes, what do you do with them? Well, if you're Genghis Khan, and tonight you look south, to China, but not all of it at once. That would be madness, and you're no madman. You've got your eye on the Western Xia, a prosperous kingdom nestled between the Gobi Desert and the Yellow River. They're rich, relatively small, and, best of all, deeply confident in their border defenses. Big mistake. You strike in 1209, rolling into their territory with your newly standardized army, which has perfected the art of siege without building actual walls. You circle cities like a sandstorm, cutting off supplies and bombarding walls with catapulted debris. You're learning quickly. Siege warfare isn't just for the Chinese anymore. The Xia, surprised that steppe nomads are now experts in logistics, hold out as long as they can. But you're patient, and your warriors have discovered a new toy: engineers. Mostly Chinese defectors, Persian escapees, or former enemies who suddenly realize your side comes with dental. Eventually, the Xia king surrenders, and you do something rather un-Genghis. You let him keep his throne. He becomes your vassal, swears loyalty, sends tribute, and probably doesn't sleep well ever again. Here's the quirky part. During this campaign, it's said that your troops once dammed a river and then released it to flood a fortified city. Historians still argue whether that actually happened, or if it's just steppe propaganda. But hey, it sounds amazing. Picture that for a second. Your army giggling like kids as they unleash a man-made tsunami on unsuspecting defenders. You don't linger long. You don't need to. You send a message. Hi, I'm Genghis. I'm organized, terrifying, and I just turned your kingdom into my weekend project. You return to the steppe richer, smarter, and more dangerous than ever. But peace? Not your thing. While the Western Xia are licking their wounds and writing passive-aggressive tribute letters, you're already looking east. The Jin dynasty, that massive, well-defended empire that once dismissed you as a minor warlord, is next. They've got riches beyond imagining, but more importantly, they've got something worse: arrogance. And if history has taught us anything so far, it's this: nothing makes Genghis Khan more motivated than someone telling him he can't do something. You start plotting, and not just in the charge over the hill kind of way. You're gathering intelligence, recruiting defectors, and figuring out how to crack cities wide open like steppe melons. And just so we don't forget your weird side, here's a fringe tidbit. Around this time, you reportedly decreed that stealing a horse was punishable by death, but borrowing a horse to chase a thief was honorable. Steppe justice, people, practical, poetic, and often decided while still in the saddle. Your empire isn't just growing. It's mutating, evolving, becoming something the world isn't ready for. You've got the infrastructure of a kingdom, the tactics of a war god, and the flexibility of someone who's lived off snowmelt and marmot stew. You are, quite simply, the worst nightmare of any sedentary power within 1,000 miles. And just between us, you're only getting started. You're back in the saddle, figuratively and literally, because this next move, it's a gallop straight into the heart of the Jin dynasty. The year is 1211, and you're staring down one of the most powerful empires in the world. The Jin have everything: fortresses, gold, cities with names so poetic they sound like lullabies. But they also have problems: corruption, a bloated aristocracy, and an army that looks good on paper but hasn't met you yet. So, naturally, you decide to knock on their front door. Well, more like kick it in. You send out envoys first, because even in warfare, you're surprisingly polite. The Jin emperor, who might be having a bad day or just really hates horse people, executes them. Classic mistake. Executing Mongol envoys is like tossing a beehive into a campfire and expecting the bees to just sit there. And so you ride. You launch a multi-pronged invasion into Jin territory with around 90,000 troops. Your sons and generals each lead their own contingents. You're not just testing their mettle, you're training them. This is the Mongol internship program. Long hours, high risk, no dental. The Jin, understandably panicked, throw everything they have at you. And here's where things get spicy. The Jin army, enormous and heavily armored, meets you in the open. You pretend to flee. They chase. Then, surprise, you wheel around and obliterate them in a flurry of arrows, smoke, and thundering hooves. Historians still argue whether this was instinct or strategy, But come on, it's you. It's always strategy. The Jin retreat behind their Great Wall. You don't bother with the front gate. Instead, you loop around through mountain passes, harass their supply lines, and begin picking off cities like they're dumplings at a festival. But you're not in a rush. You understand the art of psychological warfare. Instead of full-on sieges, you let fear do half the work. One by one, towns surrender just to avoid your reputation. And what a reputation. Here's a fun fringe tidbit. In some places, it's said that Jin soldiers abandoned their posts just because your army lit multiple campfires, making them think your force was twice as big. That's right, you weaponize campfire aesthetics. As you press deeper, you discover that the Jin dynasty is big, yes, but not nearly nimble enough. They send massive armies that are too slow, too rigid, and too bureaucratic. You counter with lightning raids, feints, and scorched earth tricks that leave their generals yelling at maps while you're already on to the next city. By 1214, you reach the Jin capital, Zhengdu, modern-day Beijing. It's a jewel of a city, thick with walls and worry. You surround it. Now, Zhengdu is no frontier outpost. It's massive, urban, and wealthy. This is the kind of place where people wear silk to feed their pigeons. And yet, even here, the fear of you pulses like a drumbeat. You starve them out, cut their supply lines, and occasionally lob dead animals over the wall, because sometimes medieval warfare gets weirdly passive-aggressive. Eventually, the Jin emperor folds. He offers gold, silk, and something even more valuable, daughters. Not just in tribute, but as consorts. It's part diplomacy, part insurance policy, and probably part please go away. You accept. Then you go away for now. But make no mistake, you've marked this dynasty. You haven't just wounded the Jin. You've exposed their entire underbelly. You've shown your people that empires can fall, that walls mean nothing, that the so-called civilized world is held together with paper and paranoia. You pull back to the steppe, where the grass still smells like freedom and fermented mare's milk. There you rest. Slightly. Your army recuperates. Your administration grows more complex. You assign new territories to loyal generals. You begin collecting engineers and scholars like Pokemon cards, Chinese, Persian, Khitan, anyone who knows something you don't. Because deep down, even if you won't admit it out loud, you are building an empire now. Not just a military engine, but a machine for rule. Here's where things get interesting. To maintain loyalty, you start practicing promoted by merit even more strictly. Even a herder's son can rise, as long as he's smart, brutal, and doesn't faint at the sight of enemy intestines. But no gore, remember? Let's just say he should have a strong stomach. Meanwhile, your enemies aren't sleeping. The Western Xia, you remember them, start acting shady. They stopped sending tribute. You frown. That's not how friendship works. You call them out. They ignore you. You don't like being ignored. So, while China simmers and the Jin dynasty tries to recover from their trauma, you saddle up again. Western Xia is about to learn that vassal is not a decorative title. You storm back into their territory in 1225. This time, there's no leniency, no warning shots. City after city falls. You're less a conqueror now and more a force of nature, like a blizzard with a grudge. And while you're doing that, you do something curious. You send ambassadors westward, not just to spy or brag, but to start planning. You've heard of kingdoms beyond the desert, of cities with domes instead of yurts, of gold, knowledge, strange languages, and yes, defiance. It tickles at the back of your mind, because the Jin are crumbling. The Xia are nearly gone. The steppe is united. So what's next? You look west, not just with your eyes, but with your ambition. And for the first time in a long while, you feel that old itch again. The one that says, let's find out what happens if I don't stop. The wind shifts westward now, tugging at your sleeves and your curiosity. The steppe behind you hums with order, tribute flows like spring meltwater, and yet, you aren't built to sit still. You gather your sons, your generals, your council, and then you send one small group galloping out into the unknown. A diplomatic mission, you say, but we both know it's more than that. They ride through the deserts of Central Asia, past towns that smell of spices and dust, through lands where minarets rise like fingers toward the heavens and markets are so loud you can barely hear your own heartbeat. A destination? The Khwarezmian Empire. Big name. Big mistake. The Khwarezmian Empire sprawls from the Caspian Sea to the edge of India. Rich, urban, powerful. Ruled by a man who styles himself Shah, which is Persian for guy who's about to make a terrible decision. You send merchants first. They bring silk, gifts, polite letters. The Shah, a man named Allah ad-Din Muhammad, doesn't trust you. He thinks you're a nomad in a fancy hat. So he kills your merchants and takes their stuff. Bold move. Wrong move. You send another envoy, a group of diplomats this time. A message of peace. The Shah shaves their heads, cuts off one of their beards, and sends them back. This is not how you do diplomacy. You breathe slowly. You hold your fury like a blade. Then quietly, you begin preparing for something you've never done before. A full-blown, long-distance military expedition across unfamiliar terrain into a culturally alien, fortified empire. Historians still argue whether this invasion was about trade, revenge, or a desire to test your reach, but you already know the answer. It's about sending a message. Don't ever touch my messengers. You divide your army with supernatural confidence. One group moves in through the north. Another punches through the south. A third sneaks through the desert with speed that seems impossible. You appear to be everywhere at once. Your favorite magic trick. The Shah panics. He scatters his forces. Cities that once stood tall fall in weeks. Bokhara, Samarkand, names that shimmer in the desert heat like mirages. These are not outposts. These are cultural gems, cosmopolitan centers with mosques, madrasas, bathhouses, poetry, and plumbing. And yet, none of that can save them. At Bokhara, you give a famous speech. Well, someone does. Historians argue whether you actually delivered it or if it's historical fanfiction. But the line echoes through time. I'm the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me. Dramatic? Yes. Effective? Oh, absolutely. You let the survivors flee so they can carry stories about your wrath, your speed, your unforgiving logic. Fear travels faster than horses, and soon the Khwarezmian Empire begins to unravel. The Shah, rather than face you, runs. First west, then south, always one step ahead. He ditches his capital and flees into the mountains of Persia, where he finally dies, cold, alone, and unremembered, which is basically your whole branding strategy for enemies. But your revenge doesn't stop there. You pursue his son next, Jalal ad-Din. And here's where things get deliciously unpredictable. Jalal ad-Din is good. Like, annoyingly good. He wins battles. He's brave. He doesn't cry when horses die. You chase him through Persia and into India, across rivers and mountain passes. At the Indus River, you almost catch him. He barely escapes by jumping into the river on horseback, which, credit where it's due, is objectively epic. You don't follow, not because you can't, but because you've proven your point. You've burned an empire to the ground, and now the West is whispering your name with a kind of nervous reverence. Let's pause for a quirky tidbit here. In the ruins of Khwarezm, your soldiers reportedly found entire libraries, scientific instruments, and astronomical charts that none of them could understand. So, naturally, you bring the scholars who do understand them back home, like souvenirs, but smarter. Now, you head north again, because while you were away, the Western Xia, the supposedly defeated ones, have been acting up again. Yes, them. Again. You're not mad. Just deeply disappointed. You roll back into their territory like a monsoon on horseback. But this time, there are no more warnings. No more spared cities. You squeeze every ounce of resistance out of them until the last of their noble line bows before you, or disappears entirely, depending on which scroll you believe. Some say you even asked them for military support on your way out, just to test their loyalty one last time. When they hesitated, that was that. And now it's late 1226. Your campaigns have stretched thousands of miles. You've faced deserts, blizzards, mountain passes, and people who use lentils in desserts. You've taken your revenge, proven your strength, and picked up a few extra astronomers along the way. But something's different this time. You're tired. Your breath comes slower. Your voice, still sharp, now cracks a little more. The men still cheer your name, but you no longer ride at the front of the column. Sometimes you stay in your tent and listen to the wind, thinking of blue skies and childhood oaths. You don't stop. Of course not. You have one final siege to oversee against the last holdouts of the Western Xia. But as your generals push the siege forward, something inside you begins to slip. Was it a fall from a horse? A wound? Illness? Historians still argue. Some say it was simple exhaustion. Others say you died from infection, or grief, or a bolt of irony from the sky. But there, beneath the blood-orange sunset of an empire almost complete, you begin to fade. You give final instructions, what to do, who should lead, where to bury you. And then you go. You're gone now, but you're also very much not. Because the moment your pulse stills, the entire steppe holds its breath. And then your sons, your generals, your scribes, and probably a few terrified cooks spring into motion. They've been preparing for this, or at least pretending not to think about it too much. Your body is cleaned. Your death kept secret for as long as possible. Some say the soldiers who prepared your grave were executed to keep the location a mystery. Others claim your tomb was trampled over by horses to conceal the dirt. There's even a theory that a river was diverted to flow over it, just to keep grave robbers from getting clever with shovels. Historians still argue where exactly you're buried. Mongolia? Siberia? Beneath a sacred mountain? Or deep in the Ordos region? Nobody knows. Not yet. But the uncertainty, that's your final gift. You don't just conquer lands. You conquer death. You become legend. And while your body lies hidden, your empire does anything but. It moves. Your son Ogdi, third in line, but probably the most level-headed, takes the reins. Because you, ever the strategist, didn't leave your empire to chance. You chose him to rule after a lot of whispering and probably some angry side-eyes from your other sons. Family politics? Oh yes, you've got those. It's like Thanksgiving, but with more cavalry. Ogdi takes his role seriously. He holds the first proper Kurultai, a council of Mongol nobles, where he's formally named Great Khan. This isn't just a throne room ceremony. This is a mobile yurt palace setup where people ride hundreds of miles just to attend. There's fermented mare's milk, dancing, archery, and more toast than anyone can count. And then expansion. Because why stop now? Ogdi continues your campaign with almost mechanical discipline. He doesn't have your flair for terrifying speeches, but he's got administration skills, which frankly is more useful when you're running the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Yep, that's not a metaphor. It's math. You went from tribal exile to ruler of an empire stretching from Korea to the Caspian Sea. That's like going from kid with a lemonade stand to owns all citrus worldwide. Your generals fan out like sparks from a forge. Subutai, remember him? Still terrifying, still brilliant. Leads invasions into the Caucasus and Russia. Oh, Russia. You probably never meant to go that far. But here we are. The Mongol army, in one of its most daring feats, marches in the middle of winter across frozen rivers and snowy plains, taking cities that thought the weather alone would protect them. Spoiler, it doesn't. The Battle of Khalkha River becomes one of those moments Russian history teachers groan about. Subutai tricks the Russian princes into charging at a decoy force, then envelopes them like a fur-lined trap. It's not just a victory. It's a blueprint for shock warfare. Quirky fact time. Some European sources describe the Mongols as having 2 livers because of how much they could drink without dying. Not biologically accurate, but hey, it's a vibe. Meanwhile, back at the capital, well, one of several, the Mongol administrative machine is doing something completely new. It's recording, counting, organizing. You probably chuckle at the idea of census takers following your cavalry, jotting down who lives where, who owes what. OGDI builds cities. Actual ones. Karakoram rises out of the grassland like a mirage with temples for multiple religions, markets, workshops, and even a silver fountain that pours wine. Did you ever dream it would go this far? Historians debate how much of this urbanization you personally envisioned, but OGDI is doing it in your name. He's tying together a world. From China to the Caspian. From Buddhist monks to Islamic mathematicians. All under the banner of a guy whose teenage nickname was Iron Crutch. Not exactly subtle, but fitting. Of course, your other sons aren't just watching this unfold. Chagatai rules Central Asia, and he's very Chagatai about it. Strict, unsmiling, not a party guy. Talayui, your youngest, doesn't get his own region, but does inherit the Mongol heartland, and he's still your most devoted. Thinks like you, fights like you, drinks possibly more than you, which is saying something. And Joki, well, that wound never healed. Joki's already gone now, died before you, but his sons are very much alive. Badu, especially, becomes a major player in the Western campaigns. He's charming, calculating, and, let's be real, way more politically patient than you ever were. Together, these heirs start shaping the empire into something stranger than fiction. A massive, decentralized network that somehow runs on horse messengers, merit-based appointments, and extreme dad energy. And yet, it works. Your legacy becomes a kind of virus, spreading across maps, languages, and court systems. People adopt your postal relay system, your law code, your attitudes about loyalty over bloodlines. Even your enemies start copying you. Because deep down, everyone loves a stable empire, even if it smells like horse sweat and old armor. Back in Europe, rumors fly. They call your armies Tartars, assuming you came from hell. One pope sends a letter to King of the Tartars, offering peace, guidance, and maybe some holy water. Just in case. Some scholars suggest that if OGDI hadn't died suddenly in 1241, your armies might have made it all the way to the Atlantic. As it was, they were on their way when they turned back, to attend a Kurultai, to elect a new great Khan. Because, even in death, you kept the traditions that held the chaos together. But none of this answers the question, why did it work? Historians still argue. Some say it was your military genius. Others say it was your willingness to incorporate local customs. Or maybe it was your brutal simplicity. Obey, or else. But the truth is, you built an empire in motion. It didn't need palaces to shine. It didn't need monuments to last. It needed only riders, loyalty, and memory. And those things, you had an endless supply. You're still hearing the distant thunder of hooves, but now the world itself feels a little smaller. Because your empire, sprawling and untamed, begins to tangle with civilizations unlike any you've ever met. First stop, China. The Jin dynasty, who ruled the northern half of the country, had dismissed your early raids as mere banditry. Spoiler alert, they were very wrong. The Mongol approach to China is like a slow boil, not a flash fire. You don't just storm walls, you starve cities, cut supply lines, and harness engineers and siege experts from every conquered land. You're patient. Even when the Great Wall towers above the steppe, it's no match for your relentless determination. You learn to love the siege ladder almost as much as your horse. You might have laughed at the idea once. What use has a horse for climbing walls? But necessity makes converts of us all. Historians still argue whether the Mongols actually breached the Great Wall in multiple places or simply bypassed it by exploiting less defended areas. Some argue it was more of a long siege and attrition warfare than cinematic storming. But you, lying on your felt mat, probably don't care about these fine details. What you do care about is your scouts bringing back news of Jin's vulnerabilities, court intrigues, rebellions, corruption. Your generals, especially the fierce Subutai, adapt quickly. They combine your famous horse archers with Chinese siege engineers, fire lances, catapults, and even early gunpowder experiments. Yes, that explosive powder the Chinese have been tinkering with gets a violent debut on the Mongol battlefield. An interesting fringe fact. Chinese defenders sometimes used flaming oxen to disrupt your cavalry charges. Not sure how effective that was, but it sure sounds like a smoky rodeo. By the time the Mongols finally toppled the Jin capital of Zhongdu, modern-day Beijing, you've cemented a legacy of ruthless but efficient conquest. You don't just want land. You want infrastructure, knowledge control. You're aware that China is a world apart, massive, wealthy, and complex. And your empire, still young, needs to learn how to govern as much as conquer. Enter your trusted advisor, Yelu Chukai, a Confucian scholar who convinces your successors to avoid total destruction. His advice? Tax and govern rather than slaughter and burn. This is revolutionary, coming from a family of steppe raiders. You might smirk, imagining your older self scoffing at tax collectors, but pragmatism wins. Your empire begins to absorb Chinese culture, administration, and technology. The Mongol postal system adapts the Chinese courier network, making messages fly faster than ever. You might appreciate this, since you probably disliked waiting, whether for battle or for dinner. Meanwhile, farther south, the Song dynasty clings to power, their cities bustling with merchants, artists, and scholars. They watch the Mongols warily, but Mongol invasions into their lands proceed slowly, hampered by geography and resistance. Historians debate whether the Mongols ever fully understood the political subtleties of southern China or simply saw it as a prize to be taken by brute force. Either way, the Song finally fall in 1279, well after your death, but all thanks to the systems you set in motion. Here's a quirky thought. Your armies sometimes use gerbils or other small animals to carry messages or even as biological distractions during sieges. Sounds a little silly, but when you're surrounded by walls and hungry enemies, you try everything. As the Chinese heartlands fold into the empire, the Mongols learn the art of ruling over sedentary peoples, balancing harsh military discipline with delicate diplomacy. Your legacy becomes more than war. It becomes governance. And all this, from the vision of a man who once survived childhood by hiding in the reeds and dreaming of horses. You're standing now, not on the steppe or before a Chinese wall, but at the edge of something stranger, a mosaic of sand, silence, and minarets. This is the Islamic world, and your curiosity is piqued. You've heard tales of rich sultans and golden cities beyond the deserts. You've also heard about the Shah of Khwarezm, ruler of a sprawling empire in Central Asia, who has insulted you in the most inadvisable way possible. You sent a caravan, a peaceful one, full of silk and intent, a diplomatic offering. He killed your envoys, had their heads shaved, their beards scorched, and then executed them, which, as you might imagine, doesn't sit well with a man who once unified warring tribes with little more than stubbornness and a sense of vengeance. Historians still argue whether the Shah truly misunderstood you, or whether he was simply too arrogant to believe a steppe warlord could be a threat. Either way, he was about to learn a lesson best taught with flaming arrows and relentless siege engines. And so, you begin one of the most famous campaigns of your life, the invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire. It's not just a war, it's a demonstration, a quiet, methodical statement. Never mess with a Mongol envoy. Your armies split like liquid mercury, pouring through the desert, crossing mountains, hitting multiple cities simultaneously. Cities like Bokhara, Samarkand, and Nishapur become infamous not for their defenses, but for how swiftly they crumble. Samarkand is especially notable. A jewel of Islamic architecture, bustling with scholars and merchants. You don't simply take it. You shatter the myth of its impregnability. There's a line attributed to you, possibly apocryphal, that you address the people of Bokhara from the steps of a mosque. I'm the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you. Dark, theatrical, and very possibly made up centuries later, but it adds a certain mythic flair, doesn't it? But it's not all fire and fury. You absorb what you can. You're fascinated by Islamic scholars and engineers. You start incorporating Persian administrators into your empire, taking their systems and polishing them into something new. You realize that conquest feeds your hunger, but administration sustains your reach. And let's not skip the weird facts. Some Mongol generals reportedly used turtle shells to divine strategy, borrowed, perhaps, from Chinese or Turkic traditions. Imagine you, the scourge of Asia, sitting cross-legged, peering into a charred turtle shell like it's a magic 8-ball. Outlook good for siege success. Your armies chase the Shah himself across the sands. He flees city to city until finally he dies on a remote island in the Caspian Sea, lonely, paranoid, and defeated. You don't even have to strike the final blow. The fear did it for you. The invasion of Khwarezm isn't just about revenge. It becomes a template, a mix of mobility, psychological warfare, and crushing speed that rewrites how empires fall. One Persian chronicler notes the Mongols' sudden appearance was like a flood or a plague. Yet historians still debate your intent. Were you deliberately trying to erase civilizations? Or just dismantling resistance as efficiently as possible? Was the destruction of cities like Nishaper strategy or spite? The reality lies somewhere sleepily in between. You probably never expected your childhood in the grasslands would lead here, to the walls of ancient Persian cities, reading tax records written in Arabic script. But your empire is becoming more cosmopolitan. Your messengers carry messages in 12 languages. Your empire hosts Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, and shamans all sitting, occasionally bickering at your court. And even as you lay waste to resistance, you carve trade routes open with the tip of your sword. The Silk Road becomes smoother under your rule, so long as everyone pays their toll and doesn't insult your mustache. The Islamic world, for all its resistance, becomes a vital artery in your empire's circulatory system. Its scientists, merchants, and bureaucrats don't just survive your conquest. They shape what comes next. And as the fires dim over Khwarezm, and your horses drink deeply from Persian rivers, you realize something simple. The world is large, yes, but it's also conquerable. You ride west now, as if the wind itself is guiding you, past the crumbled cities of Khwarezm and toward lands that, just a few years ago, didn't even know your name. But they will. Oh, they definitely will. Your generals, Subutai and Jeeb, legends in their own right, are already ahead, carving a reconnaissance path toward the Caucasus and beyond. What began as pursuit of the Shah's remaining forces turns into something else entirely. A wide-flung scouting mission that doubles as a tutorial for Europe in what happens when you ignore the Mongols. But let's rewind to the first real challenge on this route, the Georgians. These aren't soft court dwellers. They're fierce, mountain-bred warriors with sharp swords and sharper pride. They try to resist you, which is cute. It goes about as well as resisting a sandstorm with a paper umbrella. Subutai and Jeeb crush them with brutal efficiency. Georgian fortresses fall, cavalry scatter. And before long, the Mongols are riding through the Caucasus like it's just another lazy Sunday outing, minus the tea and biscuits. And then comes a strange encounter. Deep in the mountains, your forces run into the Alans and Cumans, nomadic peoples not too different from your own ancestors. At first, they band together, forming a coalition with the Georgians and others. But in a move so devious it borders on comedic, your generals bribe the Cumans to betray the alliance. Result: alliance breaks, Mongols attack in pieces, victory secured. It's the medieval version of unplugging someone's Wi-Fi mid-game. But this campaign isn't just about territory. It's about data collection. Subutai and Jeeb are basically running a 13th century test drive, mapping rivers, measuring fortress walls, and noting local weaknesses while casually sacking cities along the way. And the most legendary stop on this tour? The Battle of the Kalkar River in 1223. Here's how it goes. Your men cross into the Kievan Russlands. The local princes, tough Slavic warlords with a deeply ingrained habit of infighting, decide to unite against this new threat. It's a good instinct, bad execution. The Mongols pretend to retreat for days, luring the allied Slavic forces into overextension. Then, at the perfect moment, they turn and obliterate them in a stunning ambush. It's one of those record scratch slash freeze frame slash you're probably wondering how I got here moments for the Kievan Rus. The aftermath? The Mongols execute captured nobles under a wooden platform on which they sit and feast. Literal death by party. You can't make this stuff up. Historians still argue whether this brutal ritual was part of Mongol tradition or just psychological warfare, cranked up to 11. Either way, word travels fast. By now, Europe has heard rumors of strange horsemen from the east, ghost-like armies that appear from nowhere and vanish into the steppe. And you've still never stepped foot in Europe proper. Not yet. This was just a forward probe. But the message has been delivered. The Mongols are real, they're organized, and they aren't just some desert nuisance. A fringe detail worth knowing. During this campaign, the Mongols pick up on various local customs, including Slavic drinking songs and goat hide armor techniques. You'd be surprised how often a well-constructed goatskin tunic saves a life. As you regroup after Kalka, your empire now brushes the edges of Europe. The question is no longer whether you'll make it there, but when. Meanwhile, you've learned a great deal. The rivers of the Volga, the politics of the Slavs, the ridiculous number of princes with the same first name. You take it all in stride. Every step westward feels less like an expansion and more like gravity. The world is being pulled into your orbit, like coins sliding toward the center of a spinning bowl. And you haven't even pushed your full weight west yet. Not to worry. You will. But for now, you turn your gaze back east. You've got unfinished business in the land of silk and scholars. You pivot eastward, away from the bone-scattered rivers of the Rus, back toward a landscape painted in silk and parchment, China. But this isn't the same fragmented cluster of warring states you remember from your youth. Oh no. Since your last campaign, the Jin dynasty has regathered itself like a shaken beehive, bristling, buzzing, ready to sting. And you're the guy with the flamethrower. Well, not literally, but the Mongol siege arsenal is now brimming with Chinese engineers, Persian craftsmen, and catapults that could chuck a rock through the moon if you angled it just right. Your target? The Jin capital of Zhengdu, modern-day Beijing, give or take some dumpling shops and subway stations. You've encircled this city before, but now you're going for the kill. The siege of Zhengdu in 1215 is, in a word, claustrophobic. You block off every gate. You starve them out. And when they try to offer you gold, silver, and their princesses to lift the siege, you say thanks and keep going. It's like being offered a scented candle in exchange for your house back. It's already burning, pal. Eventually, the walls are breached. The city falls. A fire starts, some say by accident. Others say by very enthusiastic intent. And by the next morning, most of Zhengdu is smoke and ash. That's when the Jin realize you're not going away. Ever. Historians still argue whether this second sack of Zhengdu was necessary, or if it was more about sending a message. Regardless, the Jin are now breathing through a straw, pushed south into a shrinking corner of China. But before you can land the final blow, another distraction rolls in from the west. Remember the Western Xia? Those semi-independent desert monarchs who once made you kneel in your youth? Yeah, turns out they've stopped sending tribute. Again. And this time, it's personal. It's not even about the money. It's about the insult. You could have ignored them. You could have sent a strongly worded messenger. But no, you decide to erase them. Full reboot. Control plus Alt plus Del on an entire dynasty. You sweep down into the Xia lands with the fury of a man remembering middle school bullies. City after city falls, and eventually, in 1227, the Xia capital of Ningxia is surrounded. The emperor begs for mercy. Your reply is somewhere between a shrug and a death stare. But here's the twist. You're dying. Somewhere in the dry heat and battlefield fatigue. Your body has had enough. Some say it was from falling off a horse. Others whisper about an old war wound or illness picked up during a long campaign. There's even a rumor, probably invented later, that you died after trying to seduce a Tangut princess who didn't quite go along with the plan. Whatever the cause, by the time you're outside Ningxia, you're fading, and you're furious. So you order that the city be leveled after your death. Not conquered, not absorbed, deleted. The Western Xia, a culture that once held you hostage as a teenager, is to be wiped from memory. And it is thoroughly. Buildings razed, records burned, names lost, quirky detail in the chaos. You have the ground stomped flat over their capital so completely that modern archaeologists are still piecing it back together like an erased chalkboard. Meanwhile, your sons and generals surround you, not just in grief, but in existential panic. Because here's the thing, you never picked a clear successor. You've spent your life building a machine of conquest so large it's now too big for one steering wheel. And with your final breaths, you whisper not a name, but a plan. Your empire will go to your third son, Ogdi. He's not the strongest or smartest, but he's the steadiest. A safe pair of hands, less likely to get drunk and declare war on the moon. Then quietly, you die, not in battle, not on a throne, not surrounded by conquered kings. You die, they say, in your tent, somewhere near the Lupan Mountains. Just a man who once rode across the world on a borrowed pony. Historians still debate your final location. Some say you were buried in secret, your grave trampled by thousands of horses to hide it forever. Others claim your tomb lies beneath an unmarked hill watched by silent guardians who never speak. What's certain is this: no one has ever found your bones. You disappeared into legend, the way a comet blinks out behind a cloud. The Western Xia vanish. The Jin will follow. And the empire you built, stitched together from snowfields, deserts, rice paddies, and ruin, is now the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Not bad for a boy whose family was left to starve on the steppe. You're gone, but your empire doesn't even pause to blink. Like a relay baton past mid-sprint, power shifts to Ogdi, your third son, who now has the keys to the most unruly, battle-tested empire the world has ever seen. He's not flashy. He doesn't sharpen his arrows at breakfast or compose poetry while drinking fermented mare's milk. But he is blessedly stable. Ogdi takes your blueprint, the scaffolding of your life's work, and begins hammering in the nails. And he builds fast. First, he finishes what you started with the Jin dynasty. They're already limping, holed up in the south like a stubborn ink blot on an otherwise clean parchment. By 1234, they're gone, wiped out. One dynasty folded neatly into the Mongol tapestry. Then comes the matter of the Song dynasty. Ah yes, the Song. China's southern powerhouse. Rich, inventive, polite enough to send envoys, but absolutely not down to be conquered without a serious fight. But Ogdi doesn't jump straight into the Song mess. He has another idea first: Europe. Because while you're remembered in Asia as a terror on horseback, in Europe, you're more like a bedtime story designed to frighten peasants into finishing their chores. And Ogdi, practical as ever, sees untapped real estate and perhaps, in a tiny hidden corner of his brain, the chance to one-up Dad. So he sends out the dogs of war. And at the head of the pack is Bada Khan, your grandson, and the brilliant General Subutai, who you train like a human Swiss Army knife. Subutai doesn't just conquer, he choreographs invasions. Multi-pronged attacks with timing so precise it could make a Swiss watchmaker weep. By the early 1240s, the Mongols are elbow-deep in Eastern Europe. Poland, Hungary, and even Vienna tremble. Entire cities are swallowed up like breadcrumbs in a pond. Quirky fact: at the Battle of Mohi in 1241, the Mongols used portable bridges to cross rivers, set up fake camps to mislead scouts, and coordinated flanking maneuvers that feel more like chess than warfare. Some historians still argue whether Western Europe could have withstood a full Mongol invasion at all, or whether it was just dumb luck that saved them. And dumb luck arrives in the form of Ogdi's death. Just as Mongol hooves begin tapping at the gates of Western Europe, word travels back across the continent. The Great Khan is dead. According to tradition, all princes and generals must return to Mongolia for a Kurultai, a grand council to choose the next supreme leader. Think of it like a board meeting where everyone has a sword, a grudge, and half the attendees are drunk by lunch. So Batu and Subutai pull back. Europe breathes a shaky sigh of relief. And your empire, still vast, still roaring, finds itself paused. The next Kurultai drags on like a group project where no one wants to lead. Your sons and grandsons bicker, scheme, and horse trade for influence. Bata doesn't even attend. He's salty. Other branches of the family begin splitting into what would eventually become four main khanates: the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, the Chagatai Khanate, and the Yuan dynasty in China. But that's still to come. For now, the empire holds. Still, cracks are forming. Back home, the Mongols are learning how to govern. And governing, it turns out, is kind of boring. There are taxes to collect, roads to pave, postal systems to maintain, trade caravans to protect. You'd think a man who could storm 20 cities in a month could also balance a budget. But alas, spreadsheets are no one's strong suit. That's when they start borrowing brains. Tinesche administrators, Persian accountants, Arab astronomers. And even Nestorian Christian scribes are brought in to help run the empire. The Mongols don't really care what your religion is, as long as you're good at your job and don't try to tell them what meat they can or can't eat. This creates one of the quirkiest and most underrated features of the Mongol world. It's multiculturalism. In some parts of the empire, you could find a Chinese architect building a mosque for a Persian vizier, while an Armenian merchant traded silks with an Indian spice dealer, protected by Mongol cavalry. Historians still argue whether the Mongols truly fostered a cosmopolitan society or if this was just a side effect of conquest. But the result is clear. Under the Mongol umbrella, trade flows. Cultures mix, and ideas spread faster than ever before. You'd probably be amazed to see it. Meanwhile, back on the steppe, the Mongols still hold their roots close. They live in yurts, drink arag, and tell campfire stories, most of which now star you. You've become more than a leader. You're a myth. Children grow up hearing tales of your early struggles, your divine calling, your unstoppable rise. But here's the twist. Those stories are still evolving. No one's quite sure what you looked like. Some say you were tall and broad, with red hair and green eyes. Others describe you as short and dark, with a booming laugh. Your biography, The Secret History of the Mongols, is written shortly after your death, possibly by someone in your own family, possibly with a creative writing degree and a dramatic flair. It tells of omens, of blue wolves and golden eagles, of a man born to rule the skies. But even that story admits the hard truth. You were not born with a throne. You built it, mile by mile, oath by oath, betrayal by betrayal. And now, with Ogdi gone, the throne sits empty once more. Your empire, like a great horse, waits to be ridden again. Succession is a delicate thing, especially when your family tree is more of a spiky bush with roots tangled in ambition, rivalry, and unresolved daddy issues. After Ogdi's death, the Mongol Empire doesn't fall apart, but it does start holding its breath. Everyone wants the top job, but no one can agree on who deserves it, and more importantly, whose supporters have as sharp as swords. It takes years, yes, literal years, for the next great Khan to be chosen. Eventually, after a tangled web of delays, bribes, protests, and a couple conveniently timed deaths, your grandson Monk is elected in 1251. Now, Monk is a bit of a wild card. He's smart, serious, and unusually religiously tolerant. He hosts interfaith debates like their dinner theater, pitting Buddhists, Christians, and Muslims against each other with a pot of tea and a notepad. Somewhere in the back, a monk probably takes bets. But Monk's also a realist. He knows the empire can't just exist as a loose club of horse lords forever. It needs structure, a capital, revenue, roads that don't vanish when it rains. So he goes for it. He restructures the tax system with the help of Persian and Chinese advisors. He reins in corruption with brutal efficiency, meaning people start disappearing. He reorganizes the empire's provinces, reinforcing Mongol control with governors who actually speak the local languages. A shocking concept, really. And then, because a Mongol Khan can only sit still for so long before catching conquest fever, Monk launches a massive campaign south, the Song dynasty at last. You remember the Song, the southern Chinese power that had been eyeing the Mongols with both fear and a deep-seated irritation, like a neighbor with a very loud motorcycle. Well, Monk decides it's time to end that relationship permanently. It's a huge undertaking. The terrain is mountainous. The rivers are wide. The cities are well fortified and filled with soldiers who've been training for this moment for decades. Southern China is not like the open grasslands of the north. It's a nightmare of jungles, humidity, and inexplicable mosquitoes. But Monk doesn't care. He assigns his younger brother, yes, that Kublai, to lead the Eastern Front. Another brother, Hulagu, is sent west, toward the Islamic heartlands. Monk's master plan? Double expansion. One push into China, another push into the Middle East. It's the Mongol Empire's last great wave. Let's start with Hulagu. This guy takes his orders and makes them personal. He carves a brutal path through Persia, dismantles the assassins, yes, the original ones, cloaked, mountain fortress types who may or may not have inspired an entire video game franchise, and heads straight for Baghdad. Baghdad, the jewel of the Islamic world, seat of the Abbasid Caliphate, a center of learning, wealth, and libraries so vast they had their own riverfront real estate. Hulagu surrounds it, crushes it, and in 1258 brings the city to its knees. One quirky, horrifying tidbit: legend says the Mongols dumped so many books into the Tigris River that the water ran black with ink for days. Historians still argue whether that's poetic exaggeration or the grim truth. But either way, it paints a pretty vivid picture. Meanwhile, Kublai is battling his own dragons in China. He's adapting. Unlike most Mongol commanders, he studies Chinese customs. He hires Confucian scholars. He wears silk. He speaks Mandarin. It's all very controversial. Like if your cousin showed up to the family barbecue dressed as a sushi chef and said he was becoming Japanese. Monk, overseeing everything, is doing pretty well until 1259 when he dies. Unexpectedly, in the middle of the Song campaign. And that's when things get spicy. With Monk gone, the great debate resumes. Who's next? Two brothers emerge as frontrunners. Kublai in the east and Erik Bokbak in the capital. One is practically Chinese now. The other is proudly traditional. A steppe loyalist who believes yurts are superior to palaces and fermented mare's milk is a lifestyle, not a drink. Their feud explodes into the first true Mongol civil war. It's called the Toluyid Civil War, and yes, it's family drama with a continental body count. Erik Bok has the heartland, the traditionalists, and control over the Kurultai in Karakoram. Kublai has China's resources, a powerful army, and a growing fan base of Chinese bureaucrats who like his style. The fighting is fierce, long, and a bit embarrassing. Imagine two brothers slapping each other while their dad's empire watches nervously from the sidelines. Eventually, Kublai wins. Erik Bok surrenders, is imprisoned, and quietly disappears from history, probably not by choice. In 1260, Kublai declares himself Great Khan. But here's the twist: not everyone agrees. Some of the Western Khanates, the Golden Horde, the Chagatai, refuse to recognize him. They've started going their own way, each ruled by descendants of different branches of your family tree. The empire, though still enormous, is now functionally split. But Kublai doesn't care. He has bigger plans. He's not just content being Khan of the Mongols. He wants to rule all of China. So he establishes a brand new dynasty, the Yuan, and makes himself its emperor. It's official. A Mongol sits on China's throne. And yes, that sound you just heard was 1,000 Confucian ghosts groaning in unison. Kublai builds a proper capital, Dadu, now known as Beijing. He trades the saddle for the throne. His court is a bizarre mix of Mongol warriors, Chinese scholars, Persian astronomers, and one very lost Venetian named Marco Polo. More on that soon. But just as Kublai rises, the Mongol dream of unity fades. Historians still argue whether the empire could have stayed together, or whether its fragmentation was inevitable the moment your ashes were scattered to the winds. The borders are still big. The name still inspires awe. But it's no longer one horse, one rider, one command. It's now 4 khanates, loosely tied by name and the occasional strongly worded letter. Your family, once bound by survival, now grows apart under the weight of its own success. And yet, for a while longer, they ride on. You're not technically alive for this part, just a pile of honored dust scattered across some very secret, very unmarked Mongolian plain. But let's not get caught up in details. Your legacy has legs, and it's still galloping. Let's zoom back in on Kublai Khan, now firmly perched on the dragon throne in China, looking equal parts Mongol warlord and Confucian emperor. He's ruling over the Yuan dynasty, the first non-Han Chinese dynasty to conquer and unify all of China. Not bad for a guy whose grandpa was once stealing fish from rivers with a bone hook. But ruling China isn't all fireworks and rice wine. Kublai quickly learns that being emperor is a full-time job with way more paperwork than horse riding. He's constantly juggling Mongol traditions with Chinese bureaucracy. And let's be honest, those two don't mix smoothly. One side wants mobility and warfare. The other wants forms signed in triplicate. To balance things out, Kublai builds a court filled with scholars, engineers, astrologers, and a handful of European oddities. That's right, this is where Marco Polo enters stage left, blinking in the glare of Chinese civilization and probably wondering where all the spaghetti went. Polo isn't just your average tourist. He's a Venetian merchant with an eye for detail and a strong stomach for travel. He journeys all the way from Italy to China via the Silk Road, through deserts, mountains, and diplomatic headaches, and ends up spending over a decade hanging out with Kublai. Historians still argue whether Marco actually served as a royal envoy or if he just had a good PR team when he got back to Venice. Either way, his accounts paint a glittering picture of Kublai's court. We're talking paper money, grand canals, postal systems with relay riders that make FedEx look like amateur hour. There's even a summer palace in Xanadu, better known in the West as Xanadu, where the air smells like pine needles and political scheming. Quirky fact, Xanadu wasn't just a poetic myth. It was a real place with golden halls, gurgling fountains, and, rumor has it, a tame leopard or two lounging in the garden. Kublai liked his creature comforts. You would too, if you'd conquered half the known world and still had sore thighs from horseback campaigns. But even as his empire glitters, cracks begin to show. For one, the Song loyalists in southern China are not entirely on board with the whole Mongol rule thing. They stage rebellions, stir up local resentment, and generally refuse to go quietly into the history books. It takes years and a lot of patience for Kublai to fully stamp out the resistance. Second, governing China means making compromises. Kublai starts leaning heavily into Chinese-style administration. He promotes Confucian principles, wears Han robes, and even dabbles in Taoist philosophy. Mongol elites don't love this. They grumble that he's gone soft, like a cheese left too long in the sun. Meanwhile, the Chinese mandarins eye him with polite suspicion. He's too foreign for one group, not foreign enough for the other. Still, he pushes forward. He implements a class system. Mongols at the top, followed by Central Asians and Persians, with Han Chinese and Southern Chinese further down the ladder. It's a bit of an awkward pyramid, and yes, it breeds resentment, but it helps him maintain control over a culturally fragmented population. Then comes the big mistake, Japan. You remember Japan, island nation, storms, samurai. Well, in 1274 and again in 1281, Kublai decides it's time to bring Japan into the fold. He sends massive invasion fleets, hundreds of ships, tens of thousands of troops. Spoiler, both attempts fail. Spectacularly. Why? Because of the kamikaze, not the World War II kind, but the original divine winds. Massive typhoons tear through the Mongol fleets, smashing them against the shorelines and sending terrified horses swimming for their lives. The Japanese see this as divine intervention. The Mongols see as really, really bad weather. Either way, Kublai's dream of adding Japan to his empire sinks, quite literally. The cost is staggering. Ships, lives, prestige, all lost. And just like that, The edge of expansion has been reached. Meanwhile, back in the West, your other descendants aren't exactly sitting around playing chess. The four main khanates, the Yuan in China, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, are still doing their thing. Sort of. They each claim some connection to your name, but really, they're growing apart. Like siblings who all inherited pieces of your empire and now argue about who got the best real estate. The Ilkhanate in Persia is embracing Persian culture, art, and even Islam. The Golden Horde in Russia is milking tribute from terrified Russian princes while gradually settling into a more local style of governance. And the Chagatai Khanate, well, let's just say it's going through some internal drama. Historians still argue whether it ever had a coherent identity or just a series of very loud parties with horses. Kublai tries to maintain some illusion of unity. He sends letters, makes declarations, invites the other Khans to acknowledge his authority. They nod politely and ignore him. As the decades pass, Kublai becomes increasingly isolated. His wife dies. His son, his intended heir, also dies. He becomes depressed, obese, and plagued by gout. Not exactly the glamorous twilight of a ruler's career. And yet, the Yuan dynasty survives. Not forever, but for another half-century, more or less. Long enough for your name to echo across Chinese scrolls and European maps. Long enough for memories of conquest to become stories and then legends. What began as a clan of desperate horse archers on the steppe has become a multicultural, multilingual, continent-spanning legacy. Kublai dies in 1294. By then, your empire is already past its peak. But its influence still pulses through the arteries of Asia and Europe. Roads, trade routes, diplomacy, cultural exchange, silk, spices, printing, papermaking, all ripple outward because of what you and your children set in motion. Even the Black Death, oddly enough, owes some of its spread to the infrastructure of your empire. A grim kind of globalization. But hey, no empire lasts forever. Eventually, the Yuan falls to the Ming. The Ilkhanate collapses into regional squabbling. The Golden Horde fragments. The Chagatai Khanate dissolves. What was once one world under the Mongols becomes 1,000 fractured pieces. Still, for a time, you remade the world. And it all began with a kidnapped boy, a murdered father, and a burning desire never to be anyone's prisoner again. You're gone, and Kublai is gone. And even the faded banners of your empire have long since been stitched into the patchwork of history. But your legacy, your legacy lingers like the scent of campfire smoke on old leather. Quiet, enduring, and impossible to scrub out. Let's take a slow ride through the aftershocks. Long after your descendants stopped riding into cities with arrows whistling and hooves thundering, the systems they helped build kept ticking. That legendary Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, wasn't just a polite exaggeration. For nearly a century, the Silk Road became safer than it had been in centuries. Caravans moved more freely. Letters zipped from Persia to China via an early postal network, and ideas traveled faster than many armies. Chinese inventions like gunpowder, paper money, and the compass trickled west. European curiosity trickled east. And eventually, all this slow trickling became a flood. Some historians even suggest that without your empire nudging civilizations into contact, the Renaissance in Europe might have taken a bit longer to get rolling. Historians still argue whether Marco Polo's tales directly inspired explorers like Columbus, or whether they were just bedtime stories with better travel budgets. But the connection's there, like footprints in deep snow. Meanwhile, in the Muslim world, Persian historians like Rashid al-Din recorded the Mongol chronicles with a surprising blend of admiration and alarm. To them, you weren't just a conqueror, you were a necessary force, a reset button that cleared out corruption and made way for something new. Sort of like a forest fire. If the fire also instituted a better tax system. Quirky fact, one of the most unexpected Mongol legacies is cuisine. Yes, food. In parts of Central Asia, you can still find dishes named after you. and certain Mongol methods of meat preservation made their way into Russian, Korean, and even Chinese culinary traditions. Jerky and dumplings united by conquest. But it wasn't just horses and hash browns. Your name itself morphed into myth. In Russia, it was whispered like a curse. In China, it became entangled with their own national epics. In Europe, Genghis mutated into a symbol of exotic terror and unknowable strength. Shakespeare never wrote about you, but Voltaire certainly took notes. And somewhere in between the panic and praise, your story became a kind of mirror, one in which different cultures saw what they feared or wanted or respected. In modern Mongolia, you're not just remembered, you're practically canonized. Statues of you rise out of hillsides like fossilized thunder. Your face is on money, beer bottles, and the side of airplanes. Even Ulaanbaatar's airport was once named after you. Mongolians call you Chinggis, not Genghis, and revere you not for the bloodshed, but for the unification, for giving them a shared identity, a reason to stand tall among giants. And yet, the full picture of who you were, that gets harder to trace with each passing century. There are no portraits from your lifetime, no first-person diaries, no Vatelfid Goprofuti, just scraps of chronicles, Mongol oral traditions, Chinese court records, Persian biographies, and a European merchant who may or may not have met your grandson's pet leopard. Historians are still piecing it all together, debating your birth year. Was it 1162 or 1167? Your real height, were you truly as tall as a cart axle? In your religion, were you a sky-worshipping Ten Grist, a secret Buddhist, or just cosmopolitan enough to light incense in every temple you passed? The gaps in your story are as fascinating as the parts we think we know. And your grave? Still a mystery. Legend says it was hidden on purpose. Some claim the funeral procession killed everyone they passed to preserve the secret. Others say rivers were diverted to erase the tracks. A few whisper that your loyal warriors rode horses across your tomb until the ground looked untouched. To this day, no archaeologist has found it. And maybe that's the point. Maybe you didn't want a marble tomb, or a pyramid, or a golden sarcophagus. Maybe you just wanted silence. Earth, sky, wind. Because if we're being honest, you weren't building a mausoleum, you were building momentum. You didn't sculpt statues, you sculpted nations. You didn't leave blueprints, you left echoes. And those echoes are still bouncing. Every time someone praises grit over birthright, or marvels at global trade, or questions the limits of empire, your ghost is there, somewhere, smirking in the background, brushing horsehair from your sleeves. By the end of your story, you're no longer the scared boy chasing a kidnapped mother across the steppe. You're something else, a legend that outlived the temples it burned, the palaces it built, and the dynasties it unseated. There are historians who call you a monster. Others call you a genius. But when the noise dies down, you're just you, a boy born in a tent, buried in secret and remembered forever. Which brings us to now. You're lying in bed, blanket pulled to your chin, maybe hearing a fan work quietly in the background. And somewhere out in the night, across deserts and rivers and mountain spines, there's a wind stirring. Not a storm, not a conquest, just a whisper. Genghis, a name heavy as iron, light as dust. Now, as promised, your final wind down. Let's ease back. The sound of galloping fades. The banners have lowered. The stars stretch overhead like coins scattered across the steppe. You lie in soft quiet, no longer a conqueror, no longer pursued by war drums or swirling maps. Feel the grass beneath your feet melt into pillows. Hear the silence that follows a story fully told, the hush that only comes when past and present shake hands in the dark. The tent is warm. The fire's embers glow low and steady. In this final moment, there are no kingdoms to build, no enemies to chase, no questions to answer. Only the breath you take, only the peace you've earned. So rest, little horseman. Let the world shrink back to its proper size. Let your pulse settle with the slow rhythm of forgotten thunder. You've journeyed far, across centuries, continents, contradictions, and now you sleep. Tomorrow waits, but not just yet. Tonight, you drift.